So we started the first lecture on the topic of linear regression. So the bibliography is a book chapter about statistical learning, and this is one of the big guys in these two are the big guys in statistical learning. And then we have here the deep learning toolbox, the MATLAB document, and then TensorFlow. Okay, so let's start with it. So what is a regression? Regression is a kind of supervised learning. So supervised learning is characterized by the prediction of a function value, prediction of a variable value as a function of some other variables. So let's say that we have x1, and then from x1 we have to predict what is a continuous value, so that this is y as a function of x1, and this prediction is based on observation. So each one of these points is an observation, and then our regression will be a function that more or less goes through our observations and generalize the knowledge obtained by the observations. Classification is also a supervised problem in which the prediction is 0, 1. So given x1 and x2, we attach a label of belonging to class 0, belonging to class 1. That is the value that we have to predict. And this supervised learning, in which we have a set of predictor variables x1, x2, x3, and an observed variable y, and y is a function of x1, x2, x3. As opposed to this kind of problems, we have unsupervised learning. So in unsupervised learning, we have observations x1, x2, x3, but we don't have a label. And then it is the algorithm that has to put a label. So the clustering is a typical unsupervised learning problem, in which the label that the algorithm has to assign is these observations belong to the same group because they share a number of characteristics. So there are many kinds of regression models. They can be classified according to different characteristics, like the number of inputs and outputs, the complexity of the parameter fitting, interpretability of the model. And so, for instance, regarding the number of input variables, they can be classified into simple or multiple. So simple is if they use only a single predictor, so x1, or multiple if they use multiple predictors, x1, x2, x3. And the same happens with the output. And then according to the difficulty in the parameter fitting, they can be simple, they can be complex. So for instance, this kind of polynomial or relatively simple functional relationships between y and x1, x2, x3. So for instance, here we are fitting a line. Line is something very, very easy to fit. And so y is a function of x1. Then here we have y as a function of x1, but now instead of a polynomial of degree 1, as we had with the straight line, we have a higher order polynomial. We have hyperplanes. So an hyperplane is a polynomial of degree 1 in each one of the input variables. So it would be a polynomial of degree 1 in x1, a polynomial of degree 1 in x2, and the combination of these two, so y as a function of these two polynomials, gives an hyperplane. So an hyperplane is the equivalent of the plane, but in higher dimensions. So here the hyperplane and the plane coincide because we are in R3, but otherwise it is called an hyperplane in higher dimensions. So we can have more complex models like the ones given by neural networks. So here we have a neural network with just one predictor variable, so y as a function of x1. Here we have y as a function of x1 and x2, And we can have piecewise regressors like the regression tree. The regression tree partitions the input space, so x1 and x2, into disjoint areas. So in this area, the prediction will be a particular constant, and then here in this other area it will be another constant, and so on. So depending on where, in which region x1 a particular observation of x1 and x2 falls, then the predicted value will be one or another. And actually, these regression trees, we are not restricted to constant values. So we can have hyperplane predictions within each one of these regions, or we can have even more complex relationships. So this is all for this first lecture, and the next lecture will be about constant models, that we have already seen that they play an important role in a particular type of regressors. It will be the basis also to understand many features of regression.